welcome to today's session. We are continuing to discuss Tennessee Williams' play The Glass Menagerie. So this we have already noted that this was Tennessee Williams' first successful play, which is also set in the background of the Great Depression of the 1930s. And the protagonist, who is also the narrator of this memory play, Tom Wingfield, he's looking back on this period, on the time period of the 1930s from the 1940s. So this is a play which had won the Critics Circle Award in 1945 and which has been very critically received and has had many adaptations in subsequent decades. And this memory play, this is how it has been referred to by Tennessee Williams and also by other critics later on. This has a tone that's very melancholic and reflective. And it's this tone is suggested in the stage directions and in the ambience that gets created when the play is staged. So this play also introduced Williams' notion of plastic theatre or sculptural dramas. And this is a way in which in these theatrical performance, aspects of sound and lighting are incorporated into stage directions. And this also heightens the audience's emotional experience. And this is something that we notice even when we watch the adaptations of this play, the movie adaptations of this play. The setting is very carefully manicured in such ways that the sound and the lighting, they also reflect the emotional turmoil, the psychological state that the narrator and the other characters are in. It might be very useful to briefly see what Tennessee Williams meant by plastic theatre and how this feature has been discussed by the other critics later on. So the scholarship on Williams' plastic theatre has largely focused on its practical implications, as you could see in this excerpt over here. One of the critics, Roger Boxall, he states, "The new plastic theatre must make full use of all the resources of the contemporary stage: language, action, scenery, music, costume, sound, lighting." And it's we also notice in this play that the background music, the background score, it has a major role in showcasing the emotions of the characters, in highlighting the mood of each scene, and it bind them into an artistic unity conceived by the playwright. You find everything contributing to the way in which artistic unity has been conceived. And in this particular play, we notice that it is a memory play. Everything that happens, though it is those are realist things which are being portrayed, but everything that happens is also a creation in the mind of Tom Wingfield, the narrator, on whose memory the entire play is based. So everything in the play, the language, the music, the sounds, even the sound of the glass shattering, it has a very meaningful role to play in this in this entire setting. So we find that everything comes together to accentuate the emotional drama, which is also there in the background all the time. So he also continues to describe the cinematic aspects of Williams' scripts with reference to George Brandt's cinematic structure in the field of Tennessee Williams. And here, while we are close reading the play, we find that the frames are very cinematic. The way the scenes move from one to the other, the shift from one character to the other happens, the zoom in, zoom out mode, which has been very usefully, theatrically used. We find that it's very cinematic in its depiction, in its movements, in this fade in, fade out, the use of the fade in, fade out techniques. Yeah. So Esther Jackson, another critic, goes into a few more details about the plastic theatre. The plastic theatre of Williams is not confined to visual structures. Its sensuous symbol also embraces sound patterns, words, music, and aural effects. Yeah. So the way in which the dialogue delivery is being designed, that also contributes to the overall emotion of the play, the overall background of the play. To express his universal truths, Williams created what he termed plastic theatre, a distinctive style of new drama. He insisted that setting properties, music, sound, and visual effects, all the elements of staging must combine to reflect and enhance the action, theme, characters, and language. Yeah. So with this very brief preview on what is plastic theatre, we'll continue to look at the play per se. And I do strongly encourage you to read more about plastic theatre if this is something that you find interesting. So then this play, through these various theatrical techniques, we find that there are certain recurrent themes which are brilliantly captured, such as the decline of the South. As noted before, Amanda Wingfield is a grew up in the South. Her value systems are entirely different. It is conservative in a certain way, but there is also an aspiration to fit in to the world of materiality. So that irony of the South, of the American South, is very beautifully captured, and the various themes around familial strife about the father abandoning the family, about a brother who's about to abandon the family, the mother-daughter relationship, which is very affectionate and strained at the same time. So we find all of these things being captured very beautifully in this play. There's, of course, the aspects of memory, delusion, and nostalgia. We find almost all the characters inhabiting all of these traits simultaneously. So there, it's difficult to say whether they are talking out of whether it's a delusional talk or whether it's based on real memory. And the play also challenges the concept of real memory and the line between memory and imagination, the line between memory and delusion seems to be very thin over here. And there is certainly a sense of nostalgia, either about the past or about the world that is yet to be. And in Laura Wingfield's case, the nostalgia is for a very unreal world too. So while Amanda, the mother, she finds solace in these nostalgic memories about a past, we do not know whether those narratives are entirely true or not. We find Laura Wingfield finding her solace in the world of these glass menageries, in this make-believe, makeshift world, which she chooses to inhabit, where her deformity becomes something very exotic. And in the case of Tom Wingfield, he finds solace in these worlds created by movies, and then, of course, right after that, alcohol too. And he also thinks about a time when he could perhaps become a writer. But at the beginning and end of the play, where he appears in this merchant marine uniform, we also realize that he perhaps could never become the poet that he wanted to be, but he is in a world which is not confined to these four walls of his own home. So the lyrical romanticism is something that we notice in the way the play progresses, in some of these staccato sentences, in some of the way in which the dialogue delivery is designed, and we find that the ending is also shaped accordingly. It's very reflective. Right at the beginning, we know that this is a memory play and that Tom has already escaped from his the confines of the family when the play begins. But that does not reduce the dramatic effect at the end of the play. And it's also Tennessee Williams' way of telling the audience that there are certain difficult choices that people have to make sometimes, and this does not take a judgmental tone at any point. Tom Wingfield, for instance, is a character who's affectionate, but at the same time, there are these difficult choices that he has to make in order to preserve his own sanity. And for various reasons, this play is also considered as very autobiographical. And most of these writers, since they were also writing during this post-depression, post-war period, they were also dealing with these trauma in an individual on an individual basis. So it also has an autobiographical element in terms of betrayal, abandonment, the affinities towards families and such responsibilities which govern each individual's life. Yeah? So a very quick recap on the characters that we've already seen. The Wingfield family, the three members of the family, including and the father figure who's absent but who's there just as a portrait. They are the major characters, with the gentleman caller Jim O'Connor visiting them. Yeah. So Amanda Wingfield comes across as a single mother who's very nostalgic about her life as a Southern belle. And the children are a bit skeptical about the details that she gives. For instance, she boasts about the 17 gentlemen callers that she had at one point, but nevertheless, they know that this is an indulgence that she needs in order to sustain herself. Yeah, Laura is a very shy but a very perceptive young woman who is found very attractive by Jim Connor in a marginal sense, but she is also her deformity, her limp, which her mother refuses to acknowledge. Yeah, that also makes her diffident in the choices that she makes, diffident in her approach to life. And Tom Wingfield, who is the protagonist, who is the narrator, and who also gives some the interlocutor's voice over here, He is characterized by his dissatisfaction with his job. He works in a warehouse and he's unhappy over there, and he wants to become a poet, and eventually he finds escape in perhaps in a merchant navy, perhaps in a merchant marine career. And there's no way in which we can doubt his love and responsibility that he feels towards his sister. He comes across as very affectionate. He understands what his mother is going through as well, but he's unable to sustain that into a commitment. He's unable to sustain that emotions and execute them as a commitment, no matter how much he tries. So even Amanda Wingfield knows at various points of this play that it's just a matter of time that Tom Wingfield also leaves home like his father, that he would also abandon his family just like his father did. And Jim O'Connor, who is more like a cameo presence in this play, he's referred to by this very old-fashioned term, gentleman caller. That the term is used in order to also situate the way in which Amanda Wingfield's character is personified. It also showcases how Amanda Wingfield, as a type, she chooses to inhabit a different world, that world that she's familiar with from the American South. And that in some form, it is also a contrast to the intense capitalist structure which is evolving in the early 20th century America. So Jim is a former classmate of Laura, on whom she had a crush during her high school days, and he is also Tom's colleague at the warehouse at the shoe factory. And Amanda thinks that Jim O'Connor is perhaps the savior figure who would rescue the entire family and will secure Laura's future. And once Laura's future is secured through marriage, and also we need to bear this in mind that Amanda also locates a marriage as the way to a secure future, because everything else fails. In the case of Laura Wingfield, she was sent for typewriting lessons, which she fails to take, and that's seen as a deception by Amanda, and there's no other way in her mind to secure Laura's future except by way of marriage. And that, in some sense, is also a passport, it's also a ticket to Tom Wingfield's freedom. Amanda also assures him once Laura's life is secured through marriage, Tom is also free to leave wherever he wants to. And his absent presence of the father, and who's hung there as a portrait, he's a reminder, he's also a warning that this is perhaps the past as well as the future for the family. The past about a family, the past about a father who abandoned the family, and the future is about the brother, the son who's about to abandon the family. So it's just a constant reminder and a constant warning in the family about how they are just sandwiched between these two major choices that the men in this family take, who are unable to live up to the pressure, who are forced into these difficult choices because of the living conditions, because they are not able to fit in to the familial system or the financial system which has emerged. In the frontal scene one, we find a lot of meta-narrative elements, like the characters and the particularly Tom Wingfield commenting on the play being a memory. And this meta-narrative structure is something that Tennessee Williams and many other playwrights of the early 20th century, they've experimented with it quite extensively. And this notion of plastic theatre also fits in perfectly in that sense, about how a number of objects, a number of other tangible as well as intangible components are arranged together to give a sense of this plasticity. So to get a quick sense of how plasticity as a term is used in this context, there seems to be a connection between the dramatist plastic theatre and the notion of plasticity. It was initially, the term defined by the painter Hans Hofmann, and Williams also incidentally had a very acute interest in the painting. So Hofmann wrote extensively about plasticity from the early 1930s onwards. We particularly find certain scenes in other plays too as instances where the plasticity of spaces, the plasticity of human lives are getting reflected. So we'll quickly take a look at how Hofmann defines plasticity. Hofmann defines plasticity as a communication of a three-dimensional experience in a two-dimensional medium of painting. His contention is that plasticity derives from the tension between forces and counter forces, which he calls push-pull, created by the separate elements of the painting. We find this juxtaposition and this tension between different forces, different memories, different value systems at work very pertinently in a play like The Glass Menagerie. So it is presumed that Tennessee Williams borrowed this term and conceived the term plastic theatre from Hoffman, but it is not an assertion that the playwright took the idea of plastic theatre from Hoffman. He surely put the concept together from several sources over his early years, including the University of Iowa and other influences. Yeah. So what is more important is the plasticity which has been woven into a play like Glass Menagerie, where objects, where emotions, there is a plastic nature about everything. There is also a certain coming together, there's a blending of a number of things which accentuates the emotions as well as the psychological trauma and psychological abstract emotions that the play is trying to foreground. So what makes Tennessee Williams' play and the use of plasticity and his experiments in plastic theatre particularly pertinent is the fact that this was also a time when American theatre, American stage was predominantly about realism. So the anxieties which these characters have about various things in their life, they are all revealed in the first scene itself, in the way in which the props are placed, in the way in which they talk to each other, and the tensions that they are facing, the interpersonal tensions as well as the tensions within them, they all get reflected very perfectly, and their impoverished conditions, the expectations that Amanda has, the contrast between what she had before and what her children are living through. All of these are captured right from the first scene itself, and there are a lot of meta-narrative elements which accentuate the monotony and entrapment of these characters. So we find that there is a certain pattern, there's a certain boring, recurrent pattern, a predictable pattern in these characters' life, which leads them to monotony. And this is also a very clever technique which is used, given that the narrator, Tom Wingfield, is a character who is fed up with the monotonous life that he had been living. So when he is recollecting the life that he was part of, when it is his memory play, it's only perhaps very appropriate that the entire thing sounds very monotonous and the characters feel entrapped, because that's a mindset through which Tom Wingfield is also narrating this. His frustration and what he had been going through, everything is revealed very well in the way he is recollecting, and which is why this meta narrative and this structure becomes extremely important for us to understand how the play is progressing and what the characters are feeling. So we did see these, while we were reading through the play, we did notice certain scenes where the tension between the family members are very evident too. And when there is a conflict between the mother and the son, we find that there is again a pattern to it, where Amanda begins her sentences with, let me tell you, and Tom responding with, I don't want to hear any more. Amanda comes across as this nagging mother figure whom Tom Wingfield cannot stand anymore. So the fire escape here becomes that space where Tom keeps going back to, just to avoid being in the company of his mother. And this literally is a space when he escapes to when he is at home. And it also metaphorically suggests the ways in which he will eventually escape when he cannot take it anymore. So Tom's way of shutting out reality is either by disappearing into the fire, into that space, disappearing from the house through the fire escape, or escaping to the movies. It is the same way that Laura also escapes and by giving her attention, unwarranted attention perhaps, to her the collection of glass animals. And Amanda's is more she has to stay rooted in some sense, because she also has to support her family and be there and take some practical decisions. But she's also fixated in many ways on her past, which also makes things difficult for her. Her value system is entirely determined by what she experienced during her life in the South, and that sort of informs, that sort of taints all her decisions and how she chooses to make decisions for her children too. So when the gentleman caller, the arrival of the gentleman caller is is uh, reflected upon in different ways by these characters. The mother waits upon the gentleman caller with a lot of hope, but for Tom, he's like a sentence. He's hung like a sentence passed upon the wing fields. The very notion of the gentleman caller is something not just disgusting, but it's also something which eventually will lead to their uh, devastation, eventually, which will lead to their crumbling apart entirely. And that also becomes true, as we would say. And here, Tom also has the advantage of having known the past, even when, since this is a memory play and since this is all based on his recollection, he also places the characters and he also gives the audiences, the right kind of warnings to be prepared for the impending doom. So towards the end of this play, we find that the family does fall apart. And here, again, we need to draw a comparison between the other plays that we have read too. Even towards the end of All My Sons, we find that the family, which ideally, technically, would want to stay together, they just fall apart. The father, in All My Sons, the father shoots himself to death, and the mother is in this intense state of guilt. The son is also, feels responsible at some level. It's a moral responsibility that he feels even at the end of the other play, and one son has already been dead. So we find that even the characters who are affectionate to each other, who would want to ideally execute their responsibilities well towards their families, they're also forced into a number of difficult situations because of these external factors. And Amanda she's very disappointed with the attitude that Tom has towards life. According to Amanda, he has this temperament of a dreamer, and which is why he does not fit into this the work that he has. That's why, which is why he's not able to find any career prospects in whatever he's doing now. And she also is quite judgmental in a mixed way about her daughter as well. And she is, as she says, I guess she's a type that people call home girls. There's no such type, and if there is, it's a pity. That is, unless the home is hers with a husband. So one of the things that she fears most for Laura is, a future where she would be left as an old maid, where she would not be married and she will be at the mercy of the other relatives. That is something that she has perhaps, seen some women experiencing during her time in the South, and she does not want her daughter to end up like that. And the obvious alternative in that sense is for Laura to marry a gentleman caller who would be calling on her. So finally, towards the end of the play, we find that Tom Wingfield is somehow able to fulfill the demands of his family, of his mother particularly, by bringing home a gentleman caller. And it just turns out that it's his Jim O'Connor, who was the former classmate of Laura, on whom she also had a romantic interest. So eventually when Tom manages to bring home this gentleman caller, Amanda also, wants to tidy up the home, prepare themselves. You just don't know. We can't have a gentleman caller in a pigsty. All my wedding silver has to be polished. The monogram table linen ought to be laundered. The windows have to be washed and fresh curtains put up. And how about clothes? We have to wear something, don't we? So she responds to this visit, just a single visit. She responds to this as if it's a grand occasion, as if it's almost like a wedding. She wants to put up their best front, their best foot forward. The house is almost like, undergoing a radical change. This certainly is not something perhaps they can afford, but this is the only thing which would give them something to hope for. And there is also a way in which, this could be, the references to the Paradise Dance Hall, when he's referring to it, when he's recalling it, it's also like a means to escape some kind of a monotony. So this visit by Jim O'Connor could also be seen as something that disturbs the monotony, but it does not necessarily have a good ending. But this disturbance, this disruption of the monotony, is a welcome change for all of them. So Amanda does believe that there are certain responsibilities that the male figures in the family should handle. She's clearly disappointed with how her husband turned out to be, and she expects Tom to bring home money, which he does too, because he just mentioned in between about how he pays the rent. But she also takes upon herself a number of domestic responsibilities. And because we see in the play how doggedly she pursues, this telephonic campaign for the magazine subscription. And she also places an inordinate amount of hope here, we can find in this dinner visit. And this is, she is willing to invest emotionally as well as financially into this, because, she thinks there is much that she could gain out of it. Maybe, this is that perfect visit which would eventually help Laura settle. But Tom does not entirely, share that optimism. He also shares his concerns with Laura. She lives in a world of her own, a world of little glass ornaments, mother. She plays old phonograph records, and that's about all. So Tom perhaps, understands what both Amanda as well as Laura are going through. And he tries to sound practical, but those practical concerns also sound very negative to both, to particularly to Amanda. So, but Tom, we find that, he comes across as this brother figure who's always concerned about Laura. And he also knows that, she's very fragile, like the glass animals that she takes care of. She's very fragile, and she could be, hurt. She could get hurt in this entire process. And every now and then, we find Amanda escaping into this nostalgic world about her past, about the American South, the life in the American South. So this could be read in the context of the decline of the glory of the American South, which began to be witnessed in a major way from the early 20th century onwards. This decline is something which has, it's not just about the material decline, it also has an emotional quality about it. When we look at the way in which characters like Amanda respond to it, it is as if something glorious has been robbed away from them, and this glory which they inhabited earlier, the fact that it had come at a cost, that is something that characters like Amanda never perhaps seem to realize. And looks it also gives us this feeling that these are the characters who would perhaps live an entire life feeding from this nostalgia and never getting a grasp of the new order, the new political order, the new economic order, which has changed their glorious past in so many ways. And there are these moments, certain pockets of time which Amanda seems to inhabit a sense of reality. Like when he says, "You're the only young man I know of who ignores the fact that the future becomes present and the present past, and the past turns into everlasting regret if you don't plan for it." But she herself is also unable to move out of the past that she is stuck into. And even when she has these momentary epiphanic moments about the reality, even when she gets a bite of this reality which is eating this family, she always chooses to come out of it as quickly as she could. Like the scene where she refuses to acknowledge that Laura is acknowledge Laura's disability, or she refuses to acknowledge that perhaps there's nothing more that these her children could aspire for in terms of material gains, in terms of career advancement. When Jim Connor is introduced in the play, he's also introduced as a very good character, very nice character, an amicable character. That's another thing about these plays, the plays that we have read before and the one that we are reading now. All the characters in these plays, they're all amicable characters. It is just that they're unable to fit in together due to the various socio-political reasons. And these reasons are not very, it's not there out on your face. These are the subtle backgrounds. These are always there in the subtle background, influencing the way in which people respond, react, influencing, almost dictating and determining the way in which day-to-day affairs function. So Jim Connor is described as a very polite and good-natured person. He is very amused by the girlish way in which Amanda responds to him. But Jim also thinks about, we find in those conversations that he too revels in the memory of his glory days, a fragile. So that's when, he, while he's talking, he says, I was valuable to him as someone who could remember his former glory. So this is how Tom recollects about Jim also, because Jim also inhabits the past, maybe not so much in such dangerous ways, such painful ways as a Wingfield family. So while while Jim is interacting with Laura, He is also aware, intensely aware of her fragility. A fragile, unearthly prettiness has come out in Laura. She's like a piece of translucent glass, touched by light, given a momentary radiance, not actual, not lasting. This is perhaps, one of the finest descriptions about Laura in this play. It is there is radiance, but it's very momentary and it is not lasting. There's nothing in the play which is real in some sense. There's nothing which is actual. It is a memory play which is spelled out very clearly from the beginning. And the characters, while they are real characters, what surrounds them, the reality which is surrounded by them, the reality which they choose to inhabit are never actual. And particularly Glass Menagerie, the title refers, very directly to the character Laura. We find that her character, her beauty, her responses, everything is intricately tied to her fragility. And this is a fragility which begins to affect the family too. It's because of this fragile physical and emotional nature that she could not continue with her typewriting classes either. And this sets her apart from the rest of the world, but not in a very unique way, not in a way that she would be noticeable. But it sets her apart in such ways that it gives her anxiety. That this uniqueness makes her visible in ways that she does not want to be visible, because she's remembered in the typewriting classes which she had to stop too because of this humiliation. She's remembered as the girl, the shy girl who could not take the pressure and who eventually threw up on the day of her exam. So this social anxiety, we do not know whether this is an extension of her physical disability or the emotional trauma that she had been going through. But when both of these aspects come together in her, we find that this anxiety takes a different level altogether. Even within her family, she's anxious. Even in the presence of Amanda and Tom, she seems to be anxious. She seems to be always, trying to maintain some order, between these two forces, her brother as well as her mother. So this is where this reference about the movies. And this is something that we had briefly spoken about in the previous session too, how entertainment had become something very central in early 20th century America. People go to the movies instead of moving. Hollywood characters are supposed to have all the adventures for everybody in America, while everybody in America sits in a dark room and watches them have them. Yes, until there's a war. That's when adventure becomes available to the masses. Yeah. So this is very ironical. It's some dark irony over here about how the economy, the entertainment system, the market conditions, they all continue to thrive, in various ways, despite the depression, despite the the difficulties of the war, and how movies provide a pseudo kind of entertainment to people until there is a war. And war here is also very ironically seen as how adventure becomes available to the masses. There are different kinds of commentaries which are available in this play. One is about a commentary on American consumerism, this strive towards the American dream, and about how a certain kind of dehumanization is at work while this system works relentlessly. But at the same time, there's also the theme of the American South, about how Amanda's obsession with ideal womanhood, Amanda's obsession with securing Laura's life through marriage. These are also, certain sorts of ideals, certain sorts of notions which were prevalent and ironically, coexisting the capitalist the structures as well as these regressive, conservative, idealistic structures, all of those, inhabiting together. So this play is a commentary on these various things and how they inform each other. Sometimes, they are in conflict with each other. But the resultant fact is that the characters who are trapped in these systems, they are made to make difficult choices. They are rendered helpless. And this helplessness and this difficult nature of these choices, and sometimes there are no choices at all, they just have to go with the flow. And this is something which gets foregrounded in most of the plays that we discussed. And the traditional understanding of various gender roles, that's also very, very prevalent over here in terms of the expectations from the characters, in terms of what the parental expectations, in terms of the expectations of based on one's gender location, the kind of career that one is expected to take based on one's familial location. Yeah. So all of these things are being commented upon. So the important thing to be noted here is that Tennessee Williams never takes a judgmental tone about it, which is why the character who escaped this situation, he is being made to narrate this, to accentuate the pathos over here. There is a tragedy in the choice that Tom Wingfield has made. But that does not make him an evil character. That does not make him a scheming character. It makes him all the more helpless when he knows what he had done, when he knows what he was supposed to do, and this difficulty in making the right kind of decision. So when it comes to the final scene, which we will also take a very quick look at, yeah. So we'll skip those sessions where Jim O'Connor and Tom had been interacting, and while there is a momentary kind of hope which is raised, there's a momentary kind of expectation about a future getting secure, we find that it does not really work out. So we will just read through the final segments. So Tom enters. Has a gentleman caller gotten away already? The gentleman caller has made an early departure. What a wonderful joke you played on us. So it takes a tragic turn, an ironically tragic turn altogether. They had been waiting for the gentleman caller as this figure who would rescue them. But what happens on the other hand is, right after the gentleman caller shows up, things take a very ugly turn. There is a very dramatic end to the play. Also, there's a very dramatic end to the family that they are. They are no longer. Right after this, we find everything begins to disintegrate. How do you mean? You didn't mention that he was engaged to be married. Engaged? That's what he just informed us. I'll be jiggered. I didn't know about that. That seems very peculiar. What's peculiar about it? Didn't you call him your best friend down at the warehouse? He is, but how did I know? So it also tells us about the shallow nature of what they refer to as friendships. Tom obviously, had been interacting with Jim O'Connor, but obviously it's very obvious over here that they never have had any intimate conversation about what's happening in their personal lives. It seems extremely peculiar that you wouldn't know your best friend was going to be married. The warehouse is where I work, not where I know things about people. So Amanda and Tom also share, and Amanda also shares a very different notion of the workplace. So she expects Tom to socialize in the place where he's working, to know things about people, because this is what, that's what she has, that's the world that she is familiar with from her experience with the American South, where you work with people, where you meet people, and you know all about their lives too. The intrusive nature of each family knowing about the other family, each individual knowing about the other individual, that's something which is entirely lacking in this new capitalist structure, in this new order, of work. And this is something that Amanda is entirely unfamiliar with, and she expects Tom to exactly know what Jim's intentions were even before he was brought home. The warehouse is where I work, not where I know things about people. You don't know things anyway. You live in a dream. You manufacture illusions, which is entirely true too, given that he is the one who is, instrumental in staging this memory play. He crosses to door. Where are you going? I'm going to the movies. So this is his one-stop solution to everything, which becomes frustrating, as we can also see over here. There's such a crisis in the family. And perhaps, all that Amanda is hoping at this stage is for him to step up and offer comfort to Laura. But all that he can respond to is by going to the movies. And this is the only thing that he knows. This is the only response that he knows, just to leave everything, to ignore everything and move away. And this quality of, the ignoring what is going around between them, this infinite capacity to ignore reality and focus only on what is out there, as a dream, as an illusion, that's something we find as a recurrent quality in most of these plays. That's right, now that you've made us make such fools of ourselves, the effort, the preparations, all the expense, the new floor lamp, the rug, the clothes for Laura, it's getting starkly realist over here. All for what? To entertain some other girl's fiance. Go to the movies, go. Don't think about us. Our mother deserted. An unmarried sister who's crippled and has no job. Don't let anything interfere with your selfish pleasure. Just go to the movies, yeah. This is where, again, Amanda inhabits this real world very momentarily. We do not know what happens to this family right after this, because the play is also coming to an end, and we don't know. And perhaps this is all that Tom Wingfield knows too. Maybe there's nothing more that he knows about his family that he can convey, he can share with the audience either. All right, I will. The more you shout about my selfishness to me, the quicker I'll go. And I want to go to the movies. Go then go to the moon, you selfish dreamer. Tom smashes his glass on the floor. He plunges out on the fire escape, slamming the door. Laura screams, cut by door. So this is, the symbolic presence of the metaphorical presence of the fire escape becomes quite real over here when he plunges out onto the fire escape. Tom goes to the rail and grips it desperately, lifting his face in the chill white moonlight penetrating narrow abyss of the alley. So the screen says, and so goodbye. Tom's closing speech is timed with the interior pantomime. The interior scene is played as though viewed through soundproof glass. Amanda appears to be making a comforting speech to Laura, who's huddled up on the sofa. Now that we cannot hear the mother's speech, her silliness is gone, and she has dignity and tragic beauty. So it almost looks like this language, the Amanda's language, is something that she used to, cover up what she has beneath that. Without, now that her speech is inaudible, she's attempting to comfort Laura, and she has dignity and tragic beauty. And without her words, she becomes something else altogether. Yeah. So this is perhaps, warrants a different discussion altogether about the how the American South gets represented in the early 20th century plays. Laura's dark hair hides her face until the end of the speech. She lifts it to smile at her mother. Amanda's just as slow and graceful, almost dance-like, as she comforts the daughter. At the end of her speech, she glances a moment at the father's picture, then withdraws through the portiere. At the close of Tom's speech, Laura blows out the candles, ending the play. So this is, Tom's monologue again at the end, bringing the play to a closure. I didn't go to the moon. I went much further, for time is the longest distance between places. Not long after that, I was fired for writing a poem on the lid of a shoebox. Yeah, I left St. Louis. I descended the step of this fire escape for a last time and followed from then on in my father's footsteps, attempting to find in motion what was lost in space. I traveled around a great deal. The city swept about me like dead leaves, leaves that were brightly colored, but away from the branches. I would have stopped, but I was pursued by something. It always came upon me unawares, taking me altogether by surprise. Perhaps it was a familiar bit of music. Perhaps it was only a piece of transparent glass. Perhaps I'm walking along a street at night in some strange city before I have found companions. I pass a lighted window of a shop where perfume is sold. The window is filled with pieces of colored glass, tiny transparent bottles in delicate colors like bits of a shattered rainbow. Then all at once my sister touches my shoulder. I turn around and look into her eyes. Oh, Laura, Laura, I tried to leave you behind me, but I'm more faithful than I intended to be. This memory play, this recollection, also serves as an atonement. He is giving those characters life through his play. And the way he says, yeah, the distance between them is not the geographical distance now. It's a distance of time. Yeah, there are things that he should have done at a certain point of time. Now he has traveled away from that time. So the significance of time becomes very tragically, foregrounded towards the end. I reach for a cigarette. I cross the street. I run into the movies or a bar. I buy a drink. I speak to the nearest stranger. Anything that can blow your candles out. For nowadays, the world is lit by lightning. Blow out your candles, Laura. And so, goodbye. She blows the candles out and the scene dissolves. Yeah. So when the play comes to an end, we do not quite know how to place these characters and their future. We do not know what happened to the mother and the daughter, but we do know that there is an image of dignity. There's an image of peace. There's an image of comfort that Tom Wingfield chooses to retain in his mind about the mother and daughter. That's the image that he wants to leave the audience with too. So that's the intention in his mind, but we do not know how the events transpired in reality. And he seems to have found his escape, and in some ways his life hasn't changed much either. He continues to go to the movies. He finds solace in others' lives, and he also the statement towards the end is very, very telling. nowadays the world is lit by lightning, yeah, not by candles. Yeah, it's also this bringing back the entire scene back into reality, yeah, about the reality of lightning, and not it's very temporary, but it can also have very devastating effect, yeah, just like the visit of Jim O'Connor, which had offered a temporary light, but eventually it had a very devastating effect too. Perhaps the only reason for bringing this the character of Jim O'Connor into the play is just to heighten the sense of idealism that was prevalent during that time, a sense of idealism which the Wingfield family cannot perhaps even access. Yeah, so Jim's idealism towards the future. In so many ways, it reflects the American dream of progress and growth. Yeah, when he says, "My signature isn't worth very much right now, but someday, maybe, it will increase in value." Being disappointed is one thing, and being discouraged is something else. I am disappointed, but I'm not discouraged. Yeah, so this attitude makes, at least it looks like, it makes a whole world of difference over here. It's not as if they both work in the same warehouse, yeah, no, but we do know that his social standing is slightly different, his aspirations are slightly different, and he's also he's his the way in which he looks at the future is about finding worth in what he is, finding worth, making his signature turn into something that will turn money. It's very materialist. Those are not the aspirations that a character like Tom Wingfield has. So again, if we examine these plays in totality, these plays, they have chosen characters which do not fit into this new economic order, where the pursuit of material comforts, where the access of material comforts is not seen as the end. There's always something else that they are aspiring for, something either from the old world or something in an ideal world, which the kind of idealism which does not fit into the material concerns. The play essentially ends by with a note of goodbye, as we had seen, and this is also the end of a certain kind of value system. It's also the end of a certain kind of world order, and Tom's escape also symbolizes the need to inhabit the next the system, the nearest possible alternate system, in order to continue to live. Yeah, because there are very few options limited, and these difficult choices are also the result of these new orders which have begun to set in. So with this, we bring this discussion to an end, and while looking at Glass Menagerie as a memory play, we also realize that it opens up immense potential. It opens up a lot of ways in which the play could be reread, the play could be interpreted, and there are a number of theories which could be used to there are a number of theories which could be used to access the play from multiple vantage points as well. So I hope the close reading of this play and some of these frames and themes have also encouraged you to take a more sustained critical interest on the play, yeah, which will help you to identify more nuances, identify more interpretations, and as you try to go back and reread the play. So I thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you in the next session, where we will also begin the discussion of the next play, Zoo Story. Yeah, thank you.